Welcome back to part 2 of our Premier League squad reviews. This time we're going from Crystal Palace through to Manchester City. Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, the podcast website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official FPL. My name is Mitch and your host for part 2 of our Premier League squad reviews, and I am joined by Draft FC Kiran, as I was for part 1, to see us through some more Premier League teams. Are you ready to go through a few more teams, Kiran?
Yeah, let's go.
So on the last episode, if you haven't watched that one already, then go back and check that one out. After this one, we went through from Arsenal up to Chelsea. We're going up the list in alphabetical order, so go and check that one out if you haven't already. And if you are finding these useful, be sure to click the subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. And if you're listening to the audio, give us a follow on whichever platform you're listening on. Of course, we're doing all of this through the lens of Draft FPL and offering our thoughts now that the transfer windows have shut, now that we've got a few more game weeks of information, or only a few game weeks of information, in order to see how these squads and these lineups might be looking. So without further ado, let's get into the first team for this episode. Okay, so the first one up for this episode is Crystal Palace. New manager as of February, so he's now had a chance to have a full pre-season and a bit more of a runway into a fresh campaign. Oliver Glasner, that is. A fairly established formation with a back 3 or back 5, depending on how you look at it, and quite a few changes to the squad this summer, both in and out. In terms of departures, the main one is probably Michael Olise, who has been an excellent player for them for a few years, got his big money move over to Bayern Munich. They replaced him with Kamada, who I'll talk about in a few moments' time. Otherwise, a lot of the ins were at the back, and another one to bolster was Ismaila Sarr. And then the big one right at the end, someone to compete with Mateta in Eddie Nketiah. Any standouts from the new boys? I mean, there's one in particular we could bring you straight in on with your Chelsea expertise, but maybe let's start with the ones in midfield and in attack. Any of those that stand out for you?
I think Ismaila Sarr, with his Premier League experience, is someone that I would keep an eye on. I think Eze has had injuries in the past, but I'm not going to wish that upon him or wonder if that's going to happen. But that is the one that I'm most interested in their forward line. I think Nketiah, as much as he's providing competition for Mateta, could easily also just not play very many games. So I'm not really rushing to get Nketiah, but Ismaila Sarr is the one I'm interested in. And if we are going, like you said, there are some ones that I could talk about. I actually think, alongside Arsenal, which is Arsenal is one of the, we all know, is the premier defensive, probably the only defensive players that you should have in your team all year round. Everyone else is pretty much streamable. Liverpool look good so far, but Crystal Palace, like that defense is just, it's one of the strongest, and they play 5 at the back. Munoz has got attacking returns in him, but I think Chalobah just continues to just thrive when he plays either right back, centre back, or defensive midfield when he has. And I don't know if I'm saying this right, but Lacroix is also a very good player alongside Guehi. And then amongst all of that, to add in Decore, who has been out for a year, who's a very good defensive midfielder who's not seen the Palace team for a while. I think basically you've got that. These are the players you should have in your team that might be seasoned keepers. So yeah, that's my kind of view on Palace.
Yeah,
your thoughts?
Well, let's go back to front really. I mean, Lacroix seems to, can't pretend I've seen him play very much. He's played a lot for Wolfsburg. He's only 24. He's played under Glasner before. They overlapped for a year at Wolfsburg. I expect him to be straight in to replace Joachim Andersen, who they sold at age 28 to Fulham for a fee of around 30 million, and they paid 18 million for Lacroix, which, if he's even 70-80% as good as Andersen's been for them the last year or two, that's pretty good business. I mean, their biggest signing in a way is the fact that Gay didn't leave. I mean, it's like kind of feels like a signing for them. And then Chalobah, who I think is just a cracking bit of business on the right side there. So yeah, that back 3 of Guehi, Lacroix and Chalobah, I think could be a formidable back line. So they're pretty well balanced all over the pitch. The only spot where there isn't like a like-for-like replacement is Mitchell on the left, but I'm guessing a couple of those right-sided wing-backs can probably do a job over at left wing-back if they had to. Yeah, I like Ismaila Sarr. He's obviously got a bit of Premier League pedigree, and physically we know he's up to the league. Kamada was, say, the addition brought in to replace Elise, essentially. There was a bit of hype about him over the summer. I've been fairly low on him, and that hasn't really changed so far. I realised actually earlier when I was making some notes that I have actually seen Kamada play when I saw Eintracht Frankfurt play Leipzig in a league game a couple of years ago, and I have absolutely zero recollection of him standing out in that game. So perhaps my subconscious has been telling me something the whole time. And that was under Glasner, and the setup was exactly the same that we see Crystal Palace set up now. Kamada occupies either one of those 8/10 positions behind the striker, and that team, that Eintracht Frankfurt team, obviously produced kind of a few stars from it. Kostic was the big one, ended up going to Juventus for big money. So it's a tried and tested system that Kamada knows pretty well. I'm just not convinced he's kind of like that real Premier League first 11 quality. And I think especially with the arrivals of Ismaila Sarr and Nketiah, who will all be jostling for starting spots too, it's just, he'll get the odd return, but it's not someone I'm massively hot on. And as I say, Nketiah really is going to be one of the biggest headaches for draft managers. We know how short supply strikers are. He's obviously come in like for Eduard, who's gone over to Leicester, who we'll be talking about later on in this episode. But we kind of know what Nketiah is about. It's just, do we see him replacing Mateta? Is he just there for a bit of healthy competition? Could the two play alongside each other? Don't know. I know there's going to be a hell of a lot of questions about Nketiah over the next week or two, and it's going to be difficult to really judge where we place him. I mean, where would you sort of put in his Mateta's overall draft position was about 20th overall, so he was going high. People were putting a lot of stock in him after the end of the season, and to be fair, my valuations in pre-season weren't a million miles. I was slightly lower than that, but not a million miles off that, just because of how short we are of strikers. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how Mateta reacts to Nketiah arriving.
Yeah, and can Nketiah put and this is how you kind of think about these sort of things, is like, can Nketiah put a full season of returns up? And I don't know if he can. I think if he hits a goal and then you might play a few games, he might perform well, but actually for a sustained period of time, I just can't. I think Mateta will always come back, and I think we might end up in a situation where both of them rotate and things like that, which obviously bad news for Mateta owners. But yeah, I'm not really sure about that striker spot, and I'd probably avoid either of them if I had to choose. But I think the other call I was going to make on this team, where we can probably move on after that, is that you've called out Eze, but that's the obvious call.
It is.
Very
obvious.
But
yeah,
I would say I actually really like Munoz. I think whenever I watch Crystal Palace play, he is basically he's like Victor Moses in the Chelsea team. He's always forward. Almost all of their chances, I feel like he has some involvement in. And like I said, I just think their defense is going to be stellar this season. So I would be trying to pry Munoz away from someone else.
Yeah, I was just having a look to see where Munoz actually went on average on draft day. So his average draft pick was 106. But actually, if we were to just look at the defenders, he was kind of going around the likes of Stones, Udogie, the Everton centre-backs. So lower than I had him in my rankings. So I had him at 71st overall, and I think I picked him up. I definitely picked him up at one of my draft teams. So yeah, he's an exciting watch, and obviously just emerged last year, so it'd be good to see how he does with a full season, and hit the ground running. Okay, let's move on to Everton, and if the mood upbeat for Palace, we're probably at the opposite end of the mental health scale for Everton at the moment. Not the best start to the season. I don't really know what I was expecting. Probably not far off how it has appeared. They have done a bit of business this summer, and Ndiaye was an early arrival in the summer. They've also added Jesper Lindstrom, Irugbanum, Mangala, who we know from Forest days, who bizarrely, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole with this earlier, signed for Lyon permanently, having been there on loan in July, and then has already been loaned back to the Premier League to Everton because Lyon just can't afford to pay everyone's wages. It's a total mess. So he's ended up there. And then we saw Armando Broja arrive late on in the window too, just to give further segues into Kieran's Chelsea opinion. And we can pretty much do that for every team on the list in this section, for pretty much every Premier League team. Up to you where you want to start, Kieran. You can start with Broja if you want, or wherever you like.
Everton is like, I feel like a lot has been talked about Everton because they survived relegation last season. They actually, barring points deductions, were actually doing quite well. I see them as a streaky team. Once Branthwaite is fit, they'll get a clean sheet and then they'll go on a bit of a run. But I think it's hard not to be biased by last week's performance, which was, granted, 86 minutes of really good football, and Dye really stood out there. I think Bruno, not necessarily a fancy asset, also looked really good. Calvert-Lewin actually, also finally looks like he was performing, but then they just completely fell apart. And I wonder if Dyche will lay into them and then that will help them. But I don't even know where to start with this team, because I think it's just pick them up when the fixtures are good for defenders. But the attacking assets, I'm not really drawn to any of them. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, I started doing my notes by looking at Ndiaye, because he's probably kind of occupies a unique spot in the squad, in that he's actually, you feel like he could do a step over without falling over. Like he's actually got a bit of flair to him, but really hard player to assess. Obviously, he had that really incredible season in the Championship with Sheffield United. We then didn't see him come up with them because he got the move to Marseille. Then had a reasonably below par season with Marseille. I think he got just like 6 attacking returns, a lot of bench appearances. And I think so far it's almost like Dyche's tactic is just having the usual 9 men behind the ball and hoping Ndiaye can do something, unlock teams with a bit of individual magic. But that's not really sustainable over 38 games. It's promising to see them move away from the 4-4-1-1, and they played a 4-2-3-1 last week with McNeil playing in the 10 and then Ndiaye playing off the left and Harrison on the right. So that was a little bit more progressive, I guess. We're used to seeing Abdoulaye Doucouré play as that kind of second striker person, and I've got a bit of a thing with Doucouré. I kind of feel like his space in the team is just terrible for their progression as a team, because it's so easy. It's such an easy way out for Dyche to go, play Doucouré as the 10. But essentially, they've got a 5-man midfield then, and then just a single striker. So it gives him that solidity that he wants, but it's just so boring. Don't get me wrong, he bundles the odd goal in, but it is just so boring. And I think if the results don't turn very quickly, they've got 2 pretty tricky games now. They've got an away game at Villa and then an away game at Leicester. I think if they come away from that with 2 losses, I can see Dyche is gone. And then who knows what a new manager can do with some of these players, because there is an attacking side on paper there with a different vision.
Yeah, I agree. I think also so in terms of like the Broja thing that you called out, there is a world where I think Dyche plays 4-4-2 and Broja and Calvert-Lewin are the top front 2, and I think that could be quite exciting. I think, just to remind everyone, Broja is actually injured for a while, and actually I'm not necessarily sure whether it's seen as a real first team player. Like Everton very much were trying to get a cut price deal. They're not paying any of his wages until he's fit. They've not got an obligation to buy. He also then just sat around on Fulham's bench for the last 6 months of last season. So it could be a real hit and miss, this thing. It depends how much you love a gamble, but you can see a Dyche formation with Broja and Calvert-Lewin playing, and you could see that potentially being a bit of fun. So I think there's something there, but also I don't want either of these strikers really. Maybe I'm just too conservative, but there's just this team really isn't singing any tune for me.
No, I say it really is the cherry on the cake, the fact that he's going to be out for potentially another 8 weeks, it sounds like. Yeah, so super, super low risk, I guess, for Everton's point of view. They have got Beto around too, who I actually don't mind. I think he's looked all right when he comes on. I guess for the larger leagues, if you picked up Beto, you probably don't drop him immediately because like Breuer is going to be injured for another 2 months. But I think once Breuer becomes fit again, it's hard to see Beto as anything other than like their Carabao Cup striker, really. So, the only other new one who could become a draft asset, who I mentioned at the beginning, is Jesper Lindstrom. He's kind of a versatile number 10, and we can quite nicely link back to the chat we were just doing on Palace, and I can put Kieran on the spot for a first bit of trivia. Do you know why Lindstrom? We can link back to the Palace chat.
Nope.
So he was often the guy playing alongside Kamada for Glasner at Eintracht Frankfurt. Just to fully oversell the hype that did come out of Frankfurt after their impressive Europa League run. So he kind of, I'd say he's had his peak times were a couple of years ago, and he's been a bit quiet the last year or two. So he's definitely not someone on the up. So Everton are going to be taking a bit of a gamble, and he will definitely have to feel his way into the 11. He can play he could play off the right too. I think Harrison, the way he's been playing the last 18 months, really does need to be replaced in the first 11. He's not really been providing anything at all. So Lindstrom could end up playing there. So I think if you wanted to go a real attacking 4-2-3-1, you could easily have Calvert-Lewin up top, Lindstrom off the right, and then Ndiaye and McNeil in some combination as the left sided than a 10. And if you wanted to be really attacking, you could also put Doucouré in a double pivot, so that rather than just playing two, like Ghana, you actually have someone that could then actually break forward as well and have an attacking 5, because they never have more than 3 or 4 attackers on the pitch. So that would be an obvious tweak for a new manager potentially. But and then the defenders, we kind of know what they're about. No one's really changed there, and Branthwaite will be back in the team soon. And when Everton have some good fixtures, you know that if Dyche does stay there, they're going to be good value for a clean sheet, and it's not going to be pretty watching, but it's going to get us 6 points.
Yep.
Okay, let's move on to Fulham. Fulham continuing under Marco Silva. We pretty much know the way they play. The squad has a decent amount of familiarity to it, but there are also some exciting new faces in there too, which is nice, particularly for a team like Fulham, because it means for draft managers, it gives us a few extra players to kind of look at in the waiver pile week to week, depending on form and fixtures. So new players really to mention quickly, just at the back, we know what Joachim Andersen is about. Pretty big money, so I expect he will become... I don't see how he would have moved and not been assured he wouldn't be a starter. I think if they want to keep the kind of right foot, left foot combo at centre-back, that probably means Diop misses out. They signed Jorge Cuenca, I don't know how you pronounce his surname, from Villarreal, who's a 24-year-old left-footed centre-back. So, I don't see Bassi as a real nailed-on starter, so that could be a bit more of a coin toss there as the season goes on. But it'll be one of those two plus Anderson. Robinson obviously carries on the left, and then Tete and Castagna are kind of jostling for that right-back spot. Sander Berge, not a draft consideration, but obviously makes them a bit stronger in midfield. And then I guess the real stories are in attack, where they've taken two Arsenal players this summer who, again, we haven't seen a huge amount of over the last couple of years because they haven't been in the team, but certainly familiar names to us. Yeah, what do you make of those two arrivals, Kieran?
Yeah, so looking at their defence, is actually one of the teams that I would, when their fixtures are good, I'd lean towards them. I think Robinson, you've just signed Anderson. I know you're not Bassi's necessarily his biggest fan, but I think generally that back four is looking better than it was last season. But then you can counteract that by saying they've just lost Polinia. But I do generally think that this is a good defence to sort of lean on at different points in the season. And then moving forward, as much as Adama Traore is a lot of fun, I think he's going to lose his place in the team to Nelson very soon. And I think we could see some good stuff from him and Smith Rowe. But we shouldn't forget Andreas. And I think while you've in the formation you've put up, have slotted him in at central midfield. I think there'll be moments in the season when Smith Rowe might be injured or Nelson isn't playing every game, and I think Andreas will move into those forward positions as well. So I think I like that. Those players, so I think Muniz, Smith Rowe, Nelson, and Andreas are ones I'd be keen to get into my team. I think performed really well this season. It all seemed to click last season when Muniz came into the team, and I think it might continue.
Yeah, it's not the start that Muniz probably would have wanted so far. Yeah, he's wasted a couple of good opportunities, but yeah, the underlying stats are still there. He's kind of got a few new moving pieces around him. So I think once that clicks, basically there's nothing to panic about. I think if you've drafted Muniz, you don't need to go dropping him for Adam Armstrong or some other, just because they're playing. Basically, I think Muniz is still a very good striker to have, and just let him feel his way into the season, really. One of the things I kind of, just from doing the notes, is that Reece Nelson turns 25 in December. Kind of, you just assume he's like 20 forever. But he's been around and he really had to move now because he's not getting in that Arsenal team. So he could have just continually been a bench player there, I suppose. But even that, I'd say it was getting further and further away from. So, and also the obvious fact that there's some familiarity there with Smith Rowe. So the two should kind of help each other settle in. God knows how many times they've set each other up in training over the last 15 years since they were a kid, So I would put very good money that at some point this season I get a notification that says Reece Nelson goal, Smith Rowe assist, or vice versa. And I think for larger draft leagues, sort of 12 teams plus, I think Nelson should be a pickup. I think you're right. I think could even be as soon as game week 4, Nelson's into that 11, because we know the strengths and weaknesses of Adama Traore are very, very, very well established. And Nelson gives you, I think, everything that Adama Traore doesn't give you. Obviously, Adama's going to win the arm wrestle, but I think in terms of like decision making in the final third and reliably popping up, rather than all of it having to go down to Iwobi and Smith Rowe, I think Nelson is going to be the obvious choice. And Adama Traore is just a great Carabao FA Cup player against Shrewsbury on a Saturday night. It's that's where he needs to be, really. So, yeah, I think Nelson's going to be a very good pickup. And Smith Rowe, we've talked about already in pre-season and the like. So, yeah.
Yeah. But for Traore, I think it's coming off the bench as well is mainly what he'll be resigned to. Just following up, I think Nelson, let's not forget that like a season or so, the season before last, he was actually really strong when Saka was out in those moments, but he just wasn't given more of a time. Arteta just hates playing players other than Saka, so I actually think that he's quite a strong player, and hopefully that will transfer over to Fulham. And Muniz, I would just echo what you said. Actually, watching some of the games at the beginning of the season, like the Man United game, Fulham didn't have many chances in that game, but he will make something out of nothing, out of like just literally a miscontrol, and he'll have a shot or goal, and there are still chances there. So I wouldn't jump to any conclusions just yet. Any thoughts before we go on Ryan Sessegnon going back home?
I mean, I bear him no ill will whatsoever. Obviously, he's had really bad luck with injuries. He's barely played for Spurs. So if he can stay fit, he should be a decent backup option. I think Robinson is really one of their star players, to be honest. So I don't see there being much in terms of doubt who the starter is, but yeah, I wish him well and hope he can sort of get a decent amount of game time and just play football again, really.
Cool. Onto Ipswich, and I'll start with Ipswich because I want to throw over to you so you can talk through all of these wonderful players
resident expert Ipswich.
I definitely know all of their names and all of their positions. Well, I can comment on Murray Hutchinson, of course. Of course, so he's playing every team. So Ipswich have come up. McKenna was hot property coming into the season. Supposedly, Man United and Chelsea were looking at him as an option for their manager. And the only comment I can make on this squad is I can't believe Muric keeps getting moves. He has already made a mistake leading to a goal when passing out from the back. So just don't rely on any of this back five to keep him many clean sheets is what I'd start by saying before throwing over to you, Mitch.
Yeah, well, I think they're renowned for playing out from the back. I think, like every manager seems to be saying in their press conferences at the moment, we're not going to change the way we play. I think lots of teams are doing that already. We're going to see way more goals from those turnovers, but I think the attitude seems to be that in the long run, it's going to be a net positive for them. I'm just not sure it is going to be a net positive for any of the newly promoted clubs to play. I mean, Leicester probably play that way the least out of the newly promoted clubs, but they are going to get found out more than once. But at least it's fun. It's not like the old-fashioned newly promoted clubs where they just, the Dyche Burnleys, for example, who would just try and grind out 0-0s and catch a goal. So obviously the standout player here is Leif Davis. I guess the equivalent of this season's Alfie Doughty. Got 18 assists in the Championship last season from left back. Already has one this season. So he is the main fullback tasked with getting forward. It tends to be a bit lopsided, and they've favoured Tuanzebe on the right over Ben Johnson so far. And Tuanzebe is obviously more a centre back, so you can imagine with Davis getting forward, they almost fall into a back three there. So I think Davis will be in and out of our teams. If you're going to pick any Ipswich player, it's Davis, and then the rest are all well below. Greaves definitely has a bit of pedigree for nodding them in from corners. He's had one or two touches so far, but really Leif Davis is the only defender to talk about. The central midfielders, like most teams, aren't going to appeal. Interesting to see how Calvin Phillips gets on there, but Luongo and Morsey have been their main kind of two from last year, but we'll see whether Calvin Phillips gets more game time. I'll jump to number 9 and then come back to the kind of supporting cast. So Delap is out and out their first choice, number 9. Al Hamadi will probably get a bit of minutes. Hurst, I believe, is injured. He'll get the odd minutes in the odd cup game too, but Delap is definitely their starting number 9. Obviously got a goal, good goal last weekend. I had him slightly higher than the most. Hopefully he can continue to reward that faith. So the love for Adam Armstrong in pre-season was just making me ill. Yeah, so if anyone comments, should I drop Armstrong for Delap? Yes, I'll answer that comment now. Then we come into that kind of supporting cast of forwards. I guess the most exciting addition is Smodix. They also added in Ogbene, who we know from last year at Luton. I'm not going to say much on Ogbene because I think we know what he's about, and he just adds a bit of cover on the right side. Before we talk about Smodix, just to kind of let me catch my breath, why don't you give us some thoughts on Amari Hutchinson?
Amari Hutchinson is a very talented player. I was surprised that Chelsea let him go, but they are very much in the game of buying and selling players that were they thought were stars a mere season ago. Hutchinson, the talk of the training sessions when Frank Lampard and Potter were around, that amazing time period which was performing very well, but apparently the rumours from the training sessions was that Hutchinson and Felix were playing pretty much everyone off the park. So you can imagine the level that he does have. He's obviously performed. He grew into the season last season, so last year he started off a little bit slower with Ipswich, and then really grew into the point where he was one of their best players, if not the best player. Whether he can transform that into the Premier League is obviously the question on everyone's lips, but this is an exciting player to have in your team. I think if you're going to have a player from Ipswich, like I know you mentioned Davis, Hutchinson is the one I'd call out, but Delap is also, given the striker scarcity and the amount of money they spent on him, so I do believe that he's likely to start a lot of games. I actually quite like Delap as well, but I think Hutchinson's a bit of fun for your 4th or 5th mid.
Yeah, so the only thing that concerns me about Hutchinson is if you listen to any sort of Ipswich fan pods, any season reviews from last season, it's pretty unanimous that he was their best player, in terms of watching, playing, setting up and stuff. The only thing, I guess, from a FPL point of view is he got 10 goals last season. Broadhead off the left got 13. Chaplin, who's one of their other number 10s, got 13. Say Hutchinson just got 10. So him looking really good wasn't necessarily translating to massive output numbers. But so it'll be interesting to see how he can develop. Obviously, he's got that versatility. I think his best position is probably off the right, but for kind of needs must, I think he'll play 10 for a little while because Burns is injured off the right side. On the left side, I think that's where it gets really interesting. So Broadhead was their top scorer last year. He's injured at the moment, though I don't think he's going to be out for too long. They also picked up Jack Clark from Sunderland, who's always one of those players on the periphery of, is he good enough for the Premier League or is he just a really good Championship player? Was on Spurs books for a little while on loan too, as in out on loan from Spurs. But yeah, Szmodics is, I guess, the real hot property. I mean, if we think about Hutchinson being their best player with 10 goals, Szmodics was the Championship top scorer last year, 27 goals and 4 assists. His XG per 90 was 0.59, which is a very good tally. And his total XG for the entire season was just under 26. Blackburn's team XG for the season was 61. So he was virtually half of their entire goal chances, and obviously from his output numbers took the majority of the chances that he was presented with. He's kind of played in a couple of positions, either as a second striker or as number 10. We've seen him play off the left so far in the 2 appearances for Ipswich, which don't think is his best position, but again, it's just kind of needs must. So yeah, I think Szmodics is definitely a pickup for 10 plus team leagues. The same with Hutchinson. The rest, I think, are all watch and wait, or if the fixtures are really good or they're in really good form, maybe pick them up. But it's Delap, Szmodics and Hutchinson are the main strikers that are going to appear in draft teams. And then Davis is not a pickup. He is just, if you need a defender from Ipswich, Leif Davis is first choice for me. So an interesting one to watch. Lots of people touting them as maybe the ones that will break the mould and not go down. I'm not convinced. I still think those 3 teams are going to be right down there, but I'd love to see one of the new ones stay up. And if Ipswich could stay up, I would not begrudge them it at all. On that note, let's go to Leicester, who back from our sort of 15-16 season rivalry, I'd love to see go down. Screw Leicester.
Given the latest news, they go down to where? They went to a non-existent holiday for a season, somewhere between the Premier League and the Football League. Leicester have obviously pulled a fast one and got away with it in terms of PSR, and I've been really surprised by some of the business they've been doing. It feels like if I got straight started, like Mavdidi was one of the players I was excited to see in the Premier League, based on the way he performed against Chelsea, the way his stats looked in the Championship. But they seem to have signed a bunch of wide players, and he's been on the bench so far. So and then they've also signed Edouard as well. So there's been a lot of movement. What have you made of it?
Yeah, it's I mean, firstly, if people don't know what we're referring to with that news, hot off the press, obviously going into this season, everyone was expecting Leicester to get a points deduction due to financial overspending, essentially going back 2 or 3 years, and due to a loophole in the way that the Premier League worded their rules. Because Leicester spent a year in the Championship and they weren't technically a Premier League club, they're not eligible essentially for that accounting period, and so seem to have got off without any punishment whatsoever. Which, you know, I think the expectation was it was going to be somewhere around 6 points or 7 points, 8 points, something like that. Which I guess for them is like handing them 2 wins that they would have been expecting not to get. So it's massive for them. I'm sure there will be a massive storm kicked up by the other clubs that have had points deductions and other clubs that are likely to be down the bottom, but we'll wait and see on that. So anyway, yeah, back to the business. I mean, last year they mostly played a 4-3-3 with, like you said, Mavdidi on the left, Fatawu on the right, Vardy as the kind of main number 9, but Daka chipped in a bit, and then Dewsbury Hall, Winks and Ndidi. So obviously Dewsbury Hall's left. The other 5 names on that list are still there, but they basically replaced the entire front line and midfield with other options. So they've now brought in Skip, Buonanotte, Jordan Ayew, Decordova-Reid and Eduard. Now, if I said to you, Kieran, I'm managing a Premier League club and I've just brought in Skip, Buonanotte, Ayew, Decordova-Reid and Eduard, what would your knee-jerk reaction be to the business that I've done?
Yeah. Firstly, I'd ask, are you Chelsea? Because that's the sort of business that we would do if they were all 20 years old. But yes, I completely agree with you. I know what you're trying to infer. They don't seem like players that are going to light up the world. I think Decordova-Reid is a fun player. Like does the job, has been doing the job for Fulham, whether it's right back, right wing back, right midfield, striker. And Ayew also is in that Palace like fun lineup of Eze, Elise, all these players, was the one that was like going to do the work. So signing those sort of players just doesn't spell that they are going to stay up. The only one that I think you've called out as one to watch is Buonanotte, who I was shocked to learn I think is still a teenager, even though it feels like he's been around a while. And I think he'll break into that team sooner rather than later, I think. And I do think that Mavetici's got to get back in the team. I don't know what Steve Cooper's thinking. I think Buonanotte is the one that I'm interested in. And striker options, I have absolutely no fucking idea. I think Vardy, I was excited to see back in the Premier League. It was a shame that he left the Premier League last season. I thought, I want him to add to the Premier League goals. It feels like someone arrived late and still managed to smash so many records. But now you've got two strikers that are behind it. But Leicester have always done things like that because they used to have Iheanacho as well, and Daka. So yeah, I've really no idea what's going on in that striker position. Do you think Vardy's going to get rested because of his age?
I still think he's their best number 9, even at his age.
Yeah, agreed.
I guess there's probably going to be little excuse to play him for a full 90 minutes very often, unless it was a particularly tight game, and they just do want to squeeze the extra minutes out of him. But there's no reason that Vardy has to play any more than he needs to, really. So yeah, he won't start any of the cup games unless they got to like a quarter or a semi-final or something, and he can obviously come off at 60 minutes and get a decent rest, and with a safe pair of hands replacement, whether that's Eduard or Daka. Really, obviously Daka's injured at the moment, so it would be Eduard. Eduard can also drop in a bit deeper if he needs to. He's done that at Palace a little bit. But yeah, just to say, actually, I mean, that list of players, I mean, the word that springs to mind for me is mediocrity, and possibly, if you're being cynical, preparation for going down next season. But I would separate Buonanotte, to be fair to him. I think he is. There's potential there, and we saw it already at Brighton. We've seen it already, mainly off the bench so far. But I think he'll become. He's too good not to start in that number 10 role. I mean, they've been playing Ndidi as like a number 10 for a lot of games, or like a number 8 last season, which is not the Ndidi I remember from his Premier League days. So yeah, and Skip and Winks, I mean, what a midfield that is. That is a world-class midfield there. So
how you managed to bag whatever money you got for those two, I have no idea.
Yeah, no, it's decent little bit of cash there. And when you think Winks went the other way, kind of not officially, but in part of the swap for Maddison, a decent upgrade there with some financial saving. Anyway, I'm not going to talk about the defenders because we don't need to talk about defenders. Let's move on.
Yeah, agreed.
Definitely players to talk about all over the pitch here. The Klopp era has ended. Arne Slot is here. The squad as a whole looks almost identical to last season because they've done little to no business. Obviously, there's a late addition we can talk about in a moment. But otherwise, it is a pretty consistent squad. And I'd say so far, we haven't seen a huge difference played. I mean, if I was just watching Match of the Day and I didn't know that Klopp had left, I'm not sure I obviously know that there was a new style. I mean, they're clearly playing out from the back a lot more than they used to, but once it gets up into that final third, it is just Luis Diaz, Salah, Jota doing what they do, which I guess is the essence of most good attacks. The main addition is Chiesa, who again, is a player I guess most of us are aware of in an Italy shirt as much as a Juventus shirt. Had a decent season last year, 11 attacking returns, just over 2,000 minutes. He's got a very consistent career average in terms of attacking output at about one in every 2 games. There'll be a lot of hype about him because he's a new player in the game and he's on the waivers, and we've got an international break, so lots of managers can find him in the waiver pile now, but he's not one I'm massively keen on because predominantly of how well Luis Diaz has started the season, who, I'll be honest, has never been a player I've been a huge fan of. I've always preferred the other options on that side, whether that's Jota playing there, Darwin playing there, Gakpo playing there. But as he started, he's kind of, at the moment, he's undroppable there. And whereas I had him behind those other guys in my draft rankings in the latest iteration, he is definitely above all of them.
Yeah, I think that's a fair shout. I think, the call out I'd make is that I think so much is being said about Arne Slot, like how Ferguson has left or Wenger left, and how those teams really struggled immediately afterwards. I don't see this as exactly the same. Obviously, Klopp was such a big part of Liverpool's character and for so long, and I do appreciate that. But I think they went through their tough season, and that was 2 seasons ago, and they've come out the other side with a different team. Like Mane's not here, Firmino's not here. It's not like Klopp left and those players are still here on long contracts and the team is struggling. Fabinho's gone, Henderson's gone. This is a different team. So I don't consider them to have a struggle like at any moment, like Gary Neville keeps saying, like incoming. I think this is a strong team. I think they should be considered very much the 3rd best team in the league, and then actually potential title challenges if they can keep this up. Really strong performances so far. I think Diaz, completely agree with you. Never been on my radar because I always feel like he's either going to get injured or he's going to go on a run where he'll look good, do some fun tricks, but actually not produce the returns. But he's actually started red hot, and if he doesn't get injured, I think that is his spot, like you said. And that then worries me about Darwin. Not played at all in the first 3 games. Doesn't seem fancied. Salah seems to have locked down the right wing position and kind of like, I'm still good, which we were a bit concerned about. Like people were concerned about the tail end last season. He wasn't performing as well after his injury. Chiesa seems like a nice punt that they've gone for because he was just so cheap, and especially in the Champions League, is a player that they could lean on. I'm not rushing out to get Chiesa. But that front 3 at the moment, like Salah has just solidified and reminded everyone why they should have picked him up early in their drafts. But Diogo Jota and Luis Diaz, I would very much see as higher ranked than Darwin, Chiesa, or Gakpo, like you've had them. Gakpo had a great summer, so I was almost waiting to see Arne Slot play him at left wing, and I think that. Yeah. I think at some point with the Carabao Cup incoming or something like that, I think we will see Gakpo there, and let's see how he plays. But Darwin, I'm gonna throw his toys out of the pram, and we might see him leaving in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I was high on Gakpo. I still am pretty high on Gakpo, only as much because Diogo Jota and Luis Diaz are not going to be fit from now until May. So I think. And also he can play in that number 10 position. Szoboszlai, I would say, out of the front 4, has done the least to nail down his spot. He's been good, but the other 3 have been particularly good. So Gakpo can get in there. He can get in off the left. Like you said, once the heavy rotation and the fixtures comes around, Gakpo will have his chance to impress. But I don't know what he could do at the moment that would outperform Luis Diaz, to be perfectly honest. So I think for Gakpo owners, you're kind of waiting for an injury. For Darwin owners, it's a real tricky one because you'd have taken him high on draft day. You'd taken him very high on draft day. He's going to keep getting 20 minutes, 30 minutes here and there. So it's not the end of the world. He's not someone you're going to throw back into the waiver pile. But I think, he's a really hard one. I think if he was involved in a trade, if someone was offering Darwin to me, I would take him at the right price because, as I said, at the moment's notice, he could become the starting number 9 for Liverpool. But it could be a frustrating sort of month or two. And, if you can maybe hold your nerve, if you can keep him on the bench, if you've got a decent rest of the squad, it might be someone that comes through for you as the season goes on.
Yeah, I think that's we can kind of finish the forward players there. The midfield, as just like other midfields, I'm not really looking at. The defense is really interesting. I think I called it out. I think they look really strong, look more in control than perhaps they have last 2 years. The only thing that's concerning is the contract situation with Van Dijk and Trent. Maybe that's not going to worry anyone. Maybe in the end they'll just sign Van Dijk onto a 2-year contract because maybe he wants 2 years. They want to give him one because of like his age. I do appreciate that, but like having that consistency in the team, I think is going to help them. They'll eventually bow down to that. But Trent's a really funny one. I think like easily there could be some Real Madrid link at some point, and that would be really tough on them. But we know what that defense looks like. Robertson, I'm quite. He's not the Robertson that's going to get the same amount of attacking returns as the Klopp version, but he's the most nailed in that back four. Trent is the one that's going to get more of the assists, and I don't think, even if the links start coming, these go into Real Madrid or anything like that, I don't think he's going to lose his place. He's too valuable. Them doing future planning for Virgil some point in the season, I could see happening. So yeah, it's just an interesting one how that all plays out at the back there. Any of your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, really the only thing I'd say at the moment for draft managers is the Konate, Quansah switcheroo. I mean, it looked fairly certain it would be Quansah going into the season, and it was, and then got hooked. Konate's come in and played there since, so I guess we're going to have to wait, and Quansah's going to have to show himself again in Europe or in some of the cup games. I still think Quansah fits their style better. It was a tough one. I think for managers that took him as a nice mid to late round punt in the draft, you'd have seen him starting game week 1 and been like, great, I've got myself a starting Liverpool defender, and obviously it just hasn't quite panned out. But I think it's a long season, and I still think over 38 games, I would expect Quansah to play or start more games than Konate does in the league. But it could be frustrating. It could be a lot of back and forth on those two. And Trent for me is undoubtedly the number one defender in the game. Yeah, just the access to clean sheets and attacking returns is there. I know the Arsenal guys are all pretty much up there as well, but if I had to pick any single one defender, it would be him.
I think also he is really, like, it seems like he is getting forward a lot more than he has been. Like, even in moments in the box, like shots on goal in the first 3 games, I've seen more of him than I have in a while. So I think, there's potential for a higher point score than he has produced before, the way that they've started the season.
Right, let's move on to the last one for this episode, and one of their long-term rivals now, Manchester City.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not going to really... there's a lot of players here we don't need to talk about. These are established FPL assets. Obviously, new guy this summer was Savio, who we've talked about in pre-season, who's looked good. I know that I've put Doku as the one to watch this year, just because I think going into his second season, I think he could really impose himself a bit. But I know you felt that Savio could easily be, or is your one to watch, which, I wouldn't argue with at all. They're obviously both coming at it from their own side of the pitch. And then Gundogan has come back. He had a year-long holiday in Barcelona. No wonder the locals keep protesting tourists when you've got blokes like him just pissing off there for a full year. But 3,000 minutes, 5 goals, 9 assists, just doing what he does. Remarkably consistent and just a useful player. I don't think he gets in their best 11 right now. Some may disagree with that, and I would happily entertain that debate. But I think he is just excellent cover for a lot of those positions in attack. He could cover KDB, Foden, even Haaland as a false 9, give them a rest, come on just as an excellent late substitute with experience to lock that down as well. So yeah, it's good business from them. He probably shouldn't have gone in the first place, to be honest. But and then Rico Lewis is probably the other one that's kind of feeling like a new signing, even though we know what he's about now. But he's keeping Walker out of the team so far. We'll have to see how things kind of shake up a bit after the international break. But Lewis has done nothing to say he should be dropped.
Yeah, Yeah, it's actually going to be one of my call-outs. But yeah, to be honest, the things I would say, and we don't need to talk about, like, for example, Haaland being good and whether you should try and sign.
I think we can leave him out. Yeah.
Yes, I think we can leave him out. But I think if I'm thinking Champions League final, game of their life, who's the front six? Rodri given, and I think even though he is not an attacking player, I would try and draft him in most of my teams. Because just the consistency that he plays at and still picks up a goal here and there. For the midfield positions, I think maybe Gundogan and De Bruyne, maybe Foden and Bernardo Silva, and Haaland. But this is not but Premier League is not the game of your life, and I think Gundogan's not going to play that many games. I actually think that KDB is going to be rested more this season than ever before. He's got too many niggly injuries of the last few years. Going off in 2 Champions League finals probably reminds Pep that he needs to rest him more.
He's looking
and
very
the quality that he is. That shot from the corner, surprising the goalkeeper of the weekend almost. Was it Areola? Yeah, I don't know. Go watch the highlights. It was really good. But I still do think that he's going to be rested more. The reason I chose Savio as the one to watch is because with Oscar Bob injured, who looked like it could be his breakout season, but Bob maybe till December, January, you'd say Foden's might be positioned there in some games on the right wing. But I think Savio has been excellent for Girona last season, and Doku has not looked that comfortable on the right. So I think Savio is really a strong option there. And I think for a lot of drafts that I saw didn't even get drafted on draft day. I think people just considered that he's going to be the Pep's slowly getting into the team. I think sod that, try and get him in your team. I think one player I'd call out is Grealish. I think it's really do or die for him this season, and if he's really up for it, it could be really strong for him. So yeah, I would still call out Grealish, but basically just naming all of the Man City forward players, as you all know. But yeah, I completely agree with you.
Play Grealish,
yeah,
and get his opportunities. So like,
agreed.
Yeah, and the pattern will emerge where it's like the midweek team, the weekend team, as it often does. So yeah, it's just what side.
Yeah, and if I'm talking about the first choice back four, I think Guardiola is your left back. Ruben is the centre back. I actually think Kanji's going to play a lot of games, and Rico Lewis. I completely like you were saying. Rico Lewis is getting in the box as well when he's in a lot of passing in the box and shooting in the box. Walker, I thought, was kept last season purely because City were struggling with the potential of losing Gundogan, Bernardo Silva, and Walker in a window, and then too much transition at once. So they signed him up to a 2-3 year contract. But I think this could be a Walker playing a few minutes less in the Premier League this season. I think Rico Lewis could be a really strong contender for your draft league, and actually would have gone undrafted in a lot of leagues.
Yeah. The only other one that we haven't mentioned at all to keep half an eye on is John Stones, because he kind of fills that area of the pitch too, in kind of a right centre-back stepping forward. But I don't think he does it quite. He's obviously a lot classier as a central midfielder, but he's not that kind of almost box-to-box player that Lewis is. So, but he'll have his moments in the team too.
What I'd say, I think you made a really good call out there. I think Stones, when he does play, and Akanji, who is the other one that steps forward for Man City sometimes, they're both still players that they do move into a number 8 role sometimes. They can be the ones spraying passes around in a central midfield spot. But Rico Lewis is really, like I said, driving into the box, which is not something I often see from Akanji or Stone. So I think there is a slight difference when he does it. And the other call out I'd make is that while I said Rodri, when he's playing, is an absolute must for your team, he's injured right now. Kovacic and Nunes, who I think we've forgotten to put up, don't worry, draft them. Kovacic, while he scored against Chelsea, is more that Chelsea left a gaping hole in the pitch than anything Kovacic did, and he actually made a lot of mistakes. I think when Rodri is fit, I don't see him being rested, because I just don't see those two players as good enough in Pep's eyes.
Yeah, Kovacic, I think ended up on waiver watch in game week 2 because loads of managers just knee-jerked him in, and then I think he was on my get-rid list. If he wasn't, he should have been on my get-rid list last week. Yeah, his ownership's way too high. There's way too many sort of attackers with upside that would be in respective waiver piles. Doku, Savio, and the like often end up in a kind of, should I drop these for these kind of questions in terms of midfielders? I think if you're in an 8-team league, these are sort of players that could drop out into the waiver pile at times. I think if you're in a 10, 11, 12 plus team league, these are players that sort of have to be held on to, really. I mean, Doku, even if he comes on for 20 minutes at the end, could still score a brace very easily or get an assist. You know, it's not like Man City go easy on teams and sit back. They go until the 99th minute. You know, Haaland doesn't stop while he's on the pitch. You know, none of them stop. And that's kind of just what's been drilled into them. So it does increase their value. You know, Doku coming on in the 70th, Savio coming on in the 75th, whatever. I'd probably put that player in my starting 11 over a lot of those mid and average teams that we've already talked about, their attackers. If I knew one of their attackers was starting, or I knew Doku was getting 20 minutes at the end of a match against Leicester or whoever, I'm taking 20 minutes of Doku, to be honest. So
absolutely. Strong call out.
Okay, so that's it for part 2 of this series, Up to Manchester City. If you are enjoying this, as I said at the beginning, do make sure you click the subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube and give us a thumbs up. And for those listening on the audio, make sure you're following along on whichever platform you use so that you don't miss out on any of the future episodes as they drop. For those of you that play official Draft FPL, I hope most of you listening play official Draft FPL. Otherwise, what on earth are you doing here? If you do, head over to draftfc.co.uk and check out what we have on offer. Lots of improvements this summer, and you can get loads of stuff you can't find anywhere else to help you win your official FPL draft leagues, which is obviously the aim of the game. You don't want to be doing those forfeits at the end of the season. So we're going to leave things there because, as I said, there is still another one to go in this series. And yeah, until next time, stay shook.